Welcome to Lesson 8, Arrays. In this video, we're going to see how we can store large amounts of information inside of a single variable called an array. We're going to learn how to add information to an array as well as retrieve it. So let's get to it. So you may have had a program where you've had to store several pieces of information. For instance, let's say 5 numbers. And to store those 5 numbers, you created 5 variables. And that's what I'm doing right now. Oops. 4 equals 7. Let's say n5 equals 6. Now, for a small number of, for a small amount of information such as this, creating 5 variables is not that hard. But what if you had to store 100 pieces of information? And creating 100 different variables would be challenging and also inefficient. So programming languages have this concept called an array, which will allow us to store, X amount of information underneath one variable name. So let's learn about how to use an array through example. So I'm going to create a variable called n, but I want to let the computer know, the program know that this is an array. So what I'm going to use the square brackets. And that lets the program know that this is an array. The next thing I can do is I can also give it the values immediately. So let's do that. So let's say 2, 3, 9, 7, and 6. So we've effectively stored 5 pieces of information underneath one variable name. The reason we're able to do that is because this is now an array. Now, again, there's a couple of other things happening behind the scenes in terms of memory locations and how this information is stored. But to keep it simple, we will just refer to this as, all these pieces of information being stored in a single variable, which happens to be an array. So now we have to talk about how we can access that information. So this is just one way of adding information to an array. Later on in the video, we're going to show you how we can add information another way. So let's do a serial print. And now what I'm going to show you is how we can get access to each of these pieces of information in the array. So just like we've worked before, if you want to get the value from a variable, you always start off by putting the variable name. Now, because the variable n is an array, we're going to put the square brackets next. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to specify a number. That number represents the position of the information in the array. So I'm going to put bracket 0. Now, I'm putting extra spaces there just to kind of let you, focus on the number. Not that we actually need the numbers there. All right, so you can see here by us putting n bracket 0, we're getting the value of 2. So this is also a very important concept when it comes to arrays, is that the first position in the array is not 1, as what you may have thought, but that the first position in the array is 0. Which means that if I put a 1 here, what number would I get? Let's see. And you can see here, n1 gives us the 3 because the 1 position is actually the second element. So that's something that, with practice, you'll get used to it. That with the first position being 0, everything's being offset by 1. So the second element is at position 1. The third element is at position 2, and so on. So let's take a quick guess at how would I get the value of 6? So again, there's 5 elements, which means that the value of 6 is actually at position 4. Again, recalling, it's because we start at position 0 as our first position. So let's just try this out just to verify that we do get the 6. Okay, so we get the 6. So what you're seeing here is just the replacement of the fact that instead of having separate variables, separate independent variables, we can have one variable that can store several pieces of information. Now, it's very common to want to work with all the information inside of an array. Now, if you kind of saw, and I'm going to do this now, even though I won't compile it, just for visual reference. You know, if I wanted to print out all the pieces of information, I could do this. And I'm going to take out these print lines and just leave the last one as a print line. So this is going to print out the 2, the 3, the 9, the 7, and the 6. Let's see that. Okay, so you can see all the numbers are printing out, and that's great. But what if this array had 100 pieces of information? Hopefully you can appreciate us printing, using 100 different serial print lines to print out all those numbers would be inefficient. So hopefully you could kind of pick up on the idea that, okay, so you're saying I want to start at 0 and go all the way up to 4. What have we learned that kind of does that? Well, we could use a for loop. So let's try a for loop with an int I equals 0. So I starts at 0. Let's do an I of less than 5. And then let's do an I plus plus. I'm going to do a serial print of just the I value. Then I'm going to do a little serial print, just create a little separation. And we'll do it with a dash. And now let's actually print out the element in the array. So let's do a serial print of n. Now we know n is an array, so it's going to need the brackets afterwards. But now we need some number inside of here. Now if you look at what we did before, we wanted 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. What variable do we have access to right now inside the loop that's going to start at 0 and then kind of continue all the way up to 4? Well, if you think about it, that's what our loop variable is doing. So I'm going to do this. And then I'm just going to take all these out for now. And I'm just going to do a serial print line of just a couple of dashed lines so we can kind of see the separation between the two. And let's see this run. Okay. I guess I could have done a little bit more here. So let me put another dashed line between them. And actually, I'm going to do something else instead. I'm going to do the vertical line. Maybe 2 vertical lines. And let me throw a little delay in here of maybe like, let's say 3 seconds. Just so it gives me a chance to talk in between as it's running. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the first number that's popping up. I guess what else could I have done here? Actually, it's going to get caught up on this one. There we go. That's better. I like the way this one looks better. So here's the value of I. Here's the value of ni. Again, because if you kind of notice the characters are going to be printing out. Here's the value of I. Here's the value of ni. So the second number are the values from the array, 2, 3, 9, 7, 6. The first value that we're seeing here, these are just the values of I. So I want you to see that the value of I is, I don't want to say dumb, but it really has no connection to the array. We're using the value of I because we understand that we can use these values of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in conjunction with the array to actually get the information. This is a very common thing to do, that anytime you have an array, you work with some kind of a loop, possibly a for loop. Right? So I want you to get used to that when you work with an array, I'll say 99% of the time, you're going to work with a for loop as well. Again, not that you have to. I mean, there's other reasons to store information in an array and then have access to it later on. But this is a very common use. So the next thing I want to show you, something similar to this, but I'm going to do it up here. So let's say we had int lotto, and we wanted to be able to store, let's say, 6 random numbers in the lotto pool. I'm actually going to grab this instead of just leaving it. Now I'm going to delete it. All right, so notice the difference here. In the first example that we had, we created the array, and I actually gave it values immediately. But sometimes it's not possible to give values to our array, but we still want to have the capability of storing a lot of information. So that's what you're seeing in the second example. So I've created an array called lotto, and I've provided a number inside the square brackets. What this does is that this creates 6 empty spots in memory where I can store information. All right, so now what I can do inside, let's say the setup, I can say lotto bracket, because lotto is an array, and use that same technique of the bracket I. Now let's see what's happening here. The first time I do the loop, I is going to be equal to 0. So this is going to be, say, lotto 0. And let's assign it a random value from 1 to 49. And if you recall, with the random number, it's exclusive of the endpoint. So we put 50 in order to get to 49. All right, so this is going to fill that array with hopefully 6 random numbers from 1 to 50. Now, to verify that that is what we're getting, we're going to take that same concept of the loop, put it in the for loop, in the loop, except this time we're not going to assign the values. Let's go ahead and print it. So we're going to say a serial print of lotto bracket I. So notice that lotto bracket I, if you use this same type of for loop with the variable of I, becomes a very common way of programming your arrays. And I typically, tell students, don't overthink it. Use the variable I all over the place, and your usage of the array will always look the same, which is whether you're assigning a value to the array or using the value of the array. All right, so let's do that. Let's actually print out serial print. Let's do a little space afterwards. And then let's do a serial print line. And I'm going to use the escape character of /n, so we get double lines. And let's do a small delay between these. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. All right, let's give it a try. All right, so these were the random numbers that were chosen in this iteration. So we see here 5, 10, 43, 42, 46. So if you're feeling lucky, you go ahead and play these numbers in the next lotto. And if you happen to win, don't forget the persons who you're looking at in this video. Yeah. But again, so let's go back to the video. And I think at this point, we can actually go back to the presentation. So in this lesson 8, we introduce the concept of an array. An array allows you to store vast amounts of information underneath one variable name. The way you access each piece of information in the array is through a position, with the first position being 0. It's very common to use a for loop or some type of loop in conjunction with an array, because a for loop naturally starts at 0. which happens to be the first position in an array, and kind of continues on until the very end. Again, there are some other uses of the array. Now, this video focused strictly on the concept of the array. In the next video, we're going to see applications of an array with the Circuit Playground Express. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and goodbye.